You're listening to the Valley Current.
So I put on the screen the copyright, even though this is not a copyright case. I think these 4 fair use factors are actually relevant, and the Supreme Court often borrows from one area of intellectual property over to another, even though that is abhorrent to most lawyers, particularly IP lawyers. They like to think, oh, no, trademark is different from copyright, and copyright is different from patent, and patent is different from trade secret, and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is, the Supreme Court sees this whole area as one silo of essentially, property ideas.
Did you have a picture of the toy?
Yeah, I put it up a few minutes.
Oh, I missed it. Can I see it?
Yeah, I'll put it up.
I'm still a little confused as to what exactly it was.
All right, I'll put it up in a second, but let me just go through these 4 factors and compare it in the trademark realm or the trade dress realm. Purpose and character of the use, including whether the use is of a commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. This is clearly a commercial toy. It's making money. It's not about teaching dogs or teaching dog owners or teaching anyone. The nature of, in this case, the trade dress work compared to the copyright work, well, it's a bottle, right? It's a bottle and a label. It's
but
a
not just
shape.
A bottle with a dog on it. It's doing something, or the picture something on the bottle.
Well, it's the nature of the plaintiff's work is really what they're saying here. You could say, well, it's the nature of the factor number 3 is kind of the amount and substantiality of the copyright work used by the defendant's work. And, if there was less copying, I presume there would be less of an issue. And then the effect on the market is sort of like the effect on the market for the product, in this case, whiskey, probably nothing, but the effect on the market for licensing for the brand, that's pretty significant. There is obviously going to be an effect, because if you did have a licensing business before and you were putting Jack Daniel's brand onto bathing suits or other things that weren't whiskey, and now you're unable to do that because everyone just says, well, look, I'm transformative. There is no licensing business here. That was essentially prevented by these rulings. And
but those people that are putting it on T-shirts are not changing the work at all. They're just slapping the bottle on a T-shirt.
Right, and I was thinking it was closer to that, but I didn't see the picture, so that's what I guess.
I'll put the picture up in a second. Hold on. There, hold on. So to me, it's a good example of, does the Supreme Court weigh in a way that's helpful, or does it actually end up confusing? So there's the bottle on the right, the famous black and white Jack Daniel's brand.
Right, and that's the toy.
The toy Bad Spaniels on the left.
I did see that. I just thought it looked like it. So there's something I can't really. I guess I don't see the details. So okay, maybe if I
it says Bad Spaniels, the old number 2 on your Tennessee carpet. So that's the joke that the dogs.
Oh, I see. But it's not really. So yeah, because I would take that as it would be, this is where it gets factual and sort of weird, because I'm thinking it's like Jack Daniel's putting that out, but they're naming the dog Bad Spaniels and they're making a joke about what dogs do. So I'm thinking of it as almost the opposite way.
But your point, Taylor, is you think that it's actually harmful because it's tying urine into the liquid association with whiskey.
No,
my
point was that it's the opposite. Well,
it's a joke.
Is that it's a joke. That it's a joke, so it's an artistic expression. They're making a parody. But I think that what you're saying, Jack, is I think that was the trademark dilution by tarnishment argument that I believe, and I can't remember now because I looked at the case and I can't remember if the district court found there was dilution but I think the appellate court reversed on that. So I see the argument that by associating it with, you know, something irreverent like defecation and you know, basically, you know, saying Jack Daniels is, you know, shit whiskey in a sense, you could say. They're trying to say, I could see a tarnishment argument there, but.
Right. So where do you come out, Taylor, on what you would do?
I think I'm with Kim on this. I think this is pretty clearly parody. I mean, yeah, it's been.
I think it's parody on the dog part, though, not this. Yeah, I think I'm still coming out on the other side.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm not entirely sure. I have to kind of brush up on some IP law stuff and the relevant tests. But as I recall, I mean, I think that this is sufficiently transformative to
it's very interesting. It's an interesting case, and it shows how factually based these things are.
Well, how about you, Lin-Yan? Where do you come out? Oh, well, before we get to Lin-Yan, Taylor, what would you do with the Prince case? Where would you the photographer? The photographer took a picture that captured a famous person, Prince, with his permission, and owns the copyright in that picture. I guess Prince could have tried to argue and wrestle it away from them, but that's not what Prince did. And then licensed it to Warhol. Warhol used it for this magazine. And then the Warhol Foundation is now saying we can use it for a lot of different products and not have to pay any royalty to the original photographer.
Wonder if they're hanging their hat on factor one in the fair use doctrine.
That it's all commercial?
No, that it's a nonprofit.
Oh, but it's a nonprofit, but it's a nonprofit that's generating revenues for the nonprofit.
Yeah, but doesn't it provide the alternative in the first factor?
Well, it's more about is the work being used for educational purposes as opposed to is the company that owns the work using it for commercial. Like it's more about like teaching. Like you get a much wider fair use if you're teaching or you're writing a scholarly article. You get to do stuff that perhaps you couldn't do in a different context. So it's just, you know, it's sort of like giving more First Amendment birth to people that teach and giving them more freedom to not be sued and to not necessarily have to ask for permission.
Yeah.
So where do you come out on the Prince case, Taylor?
You know, I mean,
gets the royalty, doesn't get the royalty.
You know, it's a tough call. Because I feel like the Bad Spaniels is almost more of a, like it's more clearly like a joke. Oh man, this is a tough one because I think that the photographer will probably end up winning. I think that she'll get royalties. I'd have to go and look back at the test, Jack, to be honest, but
if you were a juror, do you feel like the photographer is getting hosed here? You know, you could argue Warhol Foundation is saying what made things so famous was that Warhol decided to put his name on a colorized version of that particular picture. It really wasn't necessarily about the picture itself. See, that gets into.
Oh, that's interesting because you're right.
But that's a pretty iconic image.
It's like Warhol deciding to do the Campbell soup or the Brillo box. You know, those are famous works of art. It's not so much about the Brillo box or the Campbell's can as it is about Warhol attacking consumerism and doing it in a way that uses another party's trademark in a very transformative way. I don't think those trademark owners could possibly attack Warhol for the art that he created, even though perhaps he made money on the art, because he wanted to make a statement against consumerism. And he did that with the Campbell soup cans. He did that with the Brillo boxes. I mean, you could find these on display. And maybe that's the analogy here to some degree, right?
Yeah, except you don't, well, I don't know. I don't think that there's any of that behind this colorization.
Yeah, like what's the statement?
What's the statement? What's the new expression? What's the purpose?
Yeah, I think I'm more with you on that now that I think about it, Kim. But and that's what I was kind of trying to say. I think it seems like there's kind of more of an expression in the dog toy in that it's, I mean, it's, you know, it's completely, when you really look at it, I mean, obviously there's some, I mean, they're drawing on a lot of the mark, but there's a lot of differences there. It's, you know, this is a toy as opposed to, you know, a bottle of whiskey. But with the prints, I mean, those are both still pieces of art, right? And so they're kind of the same thing. So I can see how the court might come down on the Bad Spaniel saying, hey, look, this is sufficiently transformative. But with the Prince photo, I mean, you put some color on the photo, you did some shading. I mean, is that really how much of a new expression? It's still it's still a piece of art. Here we have, you know, going from a bottle to a toy with different markings.
You could see what the foundation is doing. They're taking different things and they're amplifying Warhol's different approaches to colorizing different things. I just noticed this now going through some of these different shots, right? They're taking some of the Warhol stuff and they're creating all these derivations. Can of soup used to be like 19 cents. I remember in my dad's store stamping these cans of soup with the price on them. That probably was the price back in the 1950s or so. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question of these nonprofits are actually out there kind of generating revenue for whatever their nonprofit mission is. And I suppose that's what the Warhol Foundation is doing with that whole lineup of Prince, you know, Prince products. I
think, to me, even the Obama poster is much more transformative than just a colorized Prince picture.
And therefore it should get more protection.
I don't know. I mean, I still don't know if it meets the standard, but I think it's closer. I think it's, if you had to put them, and I know two of them are copyright and one of them is a trademark, but if you had to put the three together, I would rank the Prince as the least transformative of all of them, and the bottle the most transformative. The dog toy.
The dog toy is most transformative?
I think so, yes.
Wow.
That's what I think.
Wow, that's interesting. I never would think of it that way. I would think the Prince photo is more transformative, but maybe I'm associating Prince in a way, or I'm associating Warhol in a way that I shouldn't be doing. So that's an interesting question. If you had to question the degree of transformativeness, you would say the dog toy actually is far more transformative than either the Prince photo or the
Obama poster.
Obama poster.
Yeah.
Or the Brillo boxes, or even the Campbell piece of Campbell soup art as well.
Well, I think they're you're using it for a different purpose, and that purpose is transformative. So you're looking at a different standard.
You're using it for art or for
you're using it,
commentary.
You're using it for art, but you're also making a political or social statement, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you're making more of a statement of against consumerism, I guess.
Yeah. Whereas the Prince photo, as near as I can tell, and maybe they have the same argument there, and I just don't know about it. But as far as I can tell, it was just to jazz up an article about him.
So I was reading, he painted this series that it was for, Andy Warhol did, and it was originally for his private collection. But then I don't know exactly then how, so I don't think he had a license, any sort of license when he did the art originally, but then I'm not sure how, I don't know the history of how then it got into Vanity Fair.
Yeah, they asked him to do a cover. They commissioned him to do a cover. You should know that Jack Daniel's does license its mark to other third parties. Like there's a case, guitar case that you can put a Jack Daniel's bottle into. It's like the Jack Daniel's #7 guitar case. That's a licensed product. So they do have a licensing business, right? They would say there's Jack Daniel's containers to hold the Jack Daniel's bottles in. Like there's Jack Daniel's covers to iPods.
Yeah, but there's no transformation on those.
Right.
Is my point.
Yeah, I mean, and they have to buy a license, right? There's just a direct one-to-one taking of the mark and putting it onto some other piece of plastic or some other piece of paper or some other media designed to create an associational value that someone's willing to pay for, right? Because, an ordinary guitar case wouldn't be worth as much as a specially marked Jack Daniel's guitar case, right? With a specially marked Jack Daniel's cap to it, right? So there is a business that Jack Daniel's does have. I don't know how substantial it is, but obviously Bad Spaniels VIP decided not to license. I mean, they went out expecting a lawsuit. I mean, they went out thinking, we got to get ready for this lawsuit. It's going to happen. And we have to make sure that, I guess, we have to be sure we're ready to pursue it. And I guess they've been in this litigation for now 4 or 5 years.
Jesus.
I assume Jack Daniel's absolutely is going to continue to pursue this. Like, I think they're probably looking at it and saying, we spent a bunch of money on this, but it's not really about the money. It's about the control. It's about being able to make sure this doesn't repeat itself. And it's very similar to what FFN is thinking with respect to this employment litigation.
Right.
I mean, I'm connecting the two dots here, but it's really about, are we just going to go down paying all the time, even when it's such a weak case and we've done nothing wrong? Are we going to send the signal to employees? I guess there's even these big boxes. Wow, I didn't know that. You can put a lot of different product into those. Right? It's amazing what gets created. So to some degree, it's a principle-based approach. I mean, it'd be an interesting question how much they've spent with, a variety of results so far, right? The district judge thought it was some type of infringement. The Ninth Circuit reverses. It went up to the Supreme Court at that point, and the Supreme Court didn't take the case. The case went back to the district court. The district court granted summary judgment in favor of the First Amendment, in favor of the defendant. I don't know what happened in the Ninth Circuit on that case, on the summary judgment case, but that's the case that's up in front of the Supreme Court at this point. The grant of summary judgment on the First Amendment right. Now, maybe the Supreme Court is going to decide it on procedural grounds, which is, no, you really have to hold a trial and go through the equivalent of the analogous fair use, or it might be called the First Amendment factors. Instead of being called fair use factors, it becomes the First Amendment freedom factors. And there's some derivation of those 4 factors that gets transported into First Amendment law, applicable not only to trademark cases, but maybe to copyright cases. And then from there, maybe even patent cases, if you somehow can imagine that extension applying as well, which is you can infringe the patent, but only if you have a good First Amendment right for doing so. I mean, that sounds a little preposterous just saying it, but maybe that's the ultimate end game here that this all heads to. I mean, I don't know. You can kind of imagine that there are design patents out there and also utility patents out there that maybe people would figure out some sort of parody to take advantage of them. I don't know, but it's like the First Amendment is very general, and it can ride over lots of different bodies of law if there's really a First Amendment principle that's applicable here. And so that's, to me, it's surprising but interesting, because I think the Supreme Court is trying to maintain some degree of fun in the courthouse, is the way I think of it. I think they took the Prince case in part because of that. Now, maybe they are creating a whole body of jurisprudence under the First Amendment. I know that when I was, the law clerk for Professor Nimmer at UCLA, when I was his research assistant, he was working on a First Amendment treatise. I'm not sure it ever really got published. Maybe there was another author that took it over, I forget. Because he thought eventually there would be, and this is going back now, going on 50 years, he felt really strongly that the First Amendment will play a role in regulating the limits of intellectual property protection. And he wanted to have, just as he had Nimmer on copyright, he wanted to have Nimmer on First Amendment as well. He never lived long enough to finish the treatise. I think some other author did eventually take it over, but it wasn't very successful as a book, certainly not as successful as Nimmer on copyright. So Mel Nimmer really did see into the future and did sort of see, the ultimate limit for how far intellectual property law will go, and in particular how far copyright law will go, will be some sort of First Amendment limit. And you could say that's what, some 50 years later, the Supreme Court is now tackling in the copyright area in the Prince case, and going to tackle in the trademark trade dress area in the Jack Daniels Bad Spaniels case. So I guess we'll see where it goes. What do you think, Lin-Yan? I asked you earlier, and you didn't get a chance to weigh in. If you were a juror, what would you think in a case like this?
For the Bad Spaniels case,
right.
I agree with Taylor and Kim. I think it's really transformative, and it's just very clearly, like, on its face, a joke and a parody. So it just, to me, is like artistic expression. So I feel like I would come in favor of the dog toy manufacturer.
Yeah, and the dog toy manufacturer kind of gets off without having to pay, because there could have been an injunction that says, and this could happen in the Prince case too, that says you can do it, but you have to pay. Effectively, the First Amendment prevents the injunction, would be effectively the ruling, but it doesn't prevent the revenue sharing or the license sharing or the royalty sharing. In other words,
what are you gonna force the person to license it then?
Well, you could argue that's
if they want to use it.
You could argue that's what's happening now, Kim. You could argue that, look, if a Bud Spaniels VIP type company comes to you, your client, as the owner of a mark, and says, look, I'm thinking about creating.
No. Are you going to force Jack Daniels to provide a license?
Yeah, I'm saying the answer is because of the First Amendment freedom of expression, you're forced into a license, because not unlike in the patent area where if you're in the business of licensing, you really can't get an injunction. It's all about, there's going to be some license, there's going to be some royalty, work it out, or the court's going to impose it. Effectively, there is no injunctive relief. Or you could frame it as that's exactly what this is doing. It's setting up that trademark owners have to be more open to negotiating license deals or face a court's decision on, well, we'll figure out what the number is. We'll figure it out as part of the adjudication. It's a pretty expensive way to do it. I mean, years ago, people would just say, no, there's not going to be a license. So basically, you can't force it. But these days, you could argue that's exactly what's happening now.
Yeah, it is a weird result. I mean, it's essentially, a compulsory license. It does seem like something's wrong with the system. It shouldn't be like that, but it is.
Well, the system is saying the First Amendment right is too valuable to constrain the release of the...
I think there should be more of a line. Like, if it shouldn't be coming to them finding that it is that type of use if it needs a license. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's a problem there in that determination.
But,
like, they're putting too much stuff in the category of expressiveness.
Well, that's it. I mean, is there too much there, or there's too little there? Right.
I do kind of think there is. I'm sort of thinking that's a problem. But again, yeah, it's always a gray area, right? That's why we're in this problem to begin with. Like, where do you define that line? But I think that should be some sort of standard. Like, if you're coming to the conclusion that there needs to be a compulsory license, probably then that's where there needs to be a line drawn earlier. Like, this can't be considered expressiveness, because to get to that level, I think you've got to take yourself out of the license area.
Well, I think what I hear most of the people on this call saying is there's enough transformativeness in Bad Spaniels and enough First Amendment parody content to it to not.
But do they think it needs a license?
To not even need a license.
Yeah.
That's what I think I'm hearing, right?
And I think that makes a little more sense. Like, so now we're arguing whether or not it should be one or the other. When you get to the point where you're actually concluding.
Yeah, it infringes or it doesn't infringe, basically.
Yeah.
There still has to be that black and white determination made.
But you would say no license fee due, Kim, right?
That's right. If it doesn't infringe, no license fee due, exactly the way it is in patents. Now, you may force a reasonable royalty on people, but that's only after the patent's been found to infringe.
Right. And you're also saying even if dilution exists, if there's no infringement, there still can be dilution. You're saying the First Amendment essentially causes that dilution as just the price to be paid for allowing the First Amendment to survive. You're going to have some reputational damage. It's like almost, the analogy is almost, if you're a famous person, the First Amendment allows defamation to tarnish and maybe even destroy your reputation. But if you can't show that it was done intentionally, maliciously, and reckless disregard of the truth, the press wins summary judgment that they're allowed to attack your reputation, even if the attack is defamatory, because you're a famous person.
I don't think they should go that far, because I think this, whether or not it is this diluting your trademark or having a negative impact on it is still a test in and of itself. I'm not saying it's a clear test, but I think you should still be able to show that. And if the court decides that it does have that kind of an impact, then I think they can stop you from doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a famous case, I think it's New York Times versus Sullivan, or Sullivan versus New York Times, a very famous case where because the person who was defamed was famous and in the public eye. It's like everything that attacks Trump, everything that attacks Pence, everything that attacks Biden, everything that attacks Kamala Harris, all of those attacks on all those famous people, they really can't win a defamation case, not in the U.S., because it requires a showing of maliciousness that's nearly impossible to prove up. And so essentially it gives a very wide berth to the First Amendment. Now, maybe that's effectively what we're now going to see play out here, but not involving famous people and common law of defamation, but essentially products and intellectual property and different defendants using the First Amendment to cause some arguable reputational harm. But that's kind of the price you pay for being famous. You know, actually the opposite of the standard intellectual property law treatment, which is, hey, if you have a famous mark, you should be able to shut down anyone from doing anything that tarnishes or injures it in any way, because you worked too hard to create that brand, and no one should be able to dilute it or tarnish it or injure it in any way. So it's really like a complete 180 degrees spin on the traditional way of thinking of the law of famous marks and the law of dilution, which is part of the Lanham Act statutory protection as well. So it's not something that isn't statutory. I mean, it's real. Now, this is in the trade dress construct, but it's close enough to trademark to sort of batch it all together. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting discussion. I thought it was an interesting topic. I think it's something that is going to generate a line of cases that ultimately will spin one way or the other. I suppose if my prediction would be if the Prince case favors the copyright owner in whatever fashion it favors it, and I'm tending to think it's going to say the publications can go forward, but there's got to be some royalty, then my prediction would be a similar outcome will happen in this Jack Daniels case, which is the Bud Spaniels, Bad Spaniels could go forward, but there's got to be some payment that kind of forces essentially a pricing negotiation of some type. I don't know what that would be and what that sets up in terms of future licensing, but it does sort of set up that brand owners don't have the dramatic level of control that they may want to have. But look, the fact that they took the case and didn't just leave things the way they were suggests they want to weigh in on how far the First Amendment has gone, and maybe the First Amendment has gone too far here. I don't know. It's something I guess we'll see a decision on, but it'll probably be next year at earliest. They just took the case and presumably briefed and argued sometime next year. Maybe there'll be a ruling by next year. Hopefully it'll be consistent. Maybe it won't even be consistent with the Prince ruling. Who knows? So
Well,
thanks.
it may not, because one's copyright and one's trademark.
Right, but as I said, I think the High Court doesn't draw fine line distinctions like that. But you're right, it could, and it might. I think they tend to be at 30,000 feet in the air, and they tend to almost be as broadly analogous as I was in looking at, well, let's look at defamation law and what happens when there's reputational harm to a person. Well, who's the person, and are they already in the public light to begin with? You know, are they already a public figure? Because if they're a public figure, that kind of changes things. So in many ways, it's you could see some pretty dramatic analogies here. So if there if there are no other questions, we'll end. But I think this is a valuable educational topic, and certainly one that is going to generate more and more law and more First Amendment law. And, you could argue more and more cases eventually to the federal courts.
Tune in next time on the Valley Current.